Barbenheimer was a major event of this year. It was something unprecedented in the cinema landscape of having two major releases coming out at the same time that were so diametrically opposed, yet had equal levels of hype and support surrounding them. Although this isn't a first for the entertainment medium, as something similar happened with video games when Doom Eternal and Animal Crossing New Horizons released on the same day, and were both huge successes. On the one hand, you have Barbie, which was this colourful feminist film, and on the other, you have Oppenheimer, this gritty true tale about J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. The crazy thing is that not only were both films massively successful, they were also considered to actually be really good, marking a big win for filmmakers, film theatres, and general cinema goers. However, the downside to Barbenheimer is that it resulted in many other films releasing around that time being overshadowed. One such film is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 or Mission Impossible 7, however you want to call it. Which is a massive shame because Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 was a really good film. The Mission Impossible franchise is an interesting one. It's a franchise where there's arguably only one bad entry, or not, depending on how you feel about Mission Impossible 2. But since the release of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, the franchise has only released winners. It's a franchise carried on the back of its leading man, Tom Cruise. In all honesty, Ethan Hunt has never really been that interesting of a character. Most people look at the character and only ever refer to him as Tom Cruise. He's definitely had some development over the years and there is some character to him, but overall, he's just Tom Cruise. And that's no different in Mission Impossible 7. If you enjoy the simplicity of Ethan Hunt, then have no fear, he doesn't change at all here. And if you were hoping for him to maybe gain a few extra layers in this film, then I hate to tell you that he doesn't. Although the film does employ a retcon to try and tie Ethan Hunt to the film's villain in what I believe was meant to add more layers to the character, but it didn't for me personally. The only time I think Mission Impossible was ever able to get some character into Ethan Hunt was whenever his wife Julia was involved in the story. It doesn't help that the villain in the film isn't great. Gabriel is just very one note. I don't think it has anything to do with performance, and it's just due to the story not really giving the actor much to do. Fortunately, this is part 1 of 2, so hopefully they'll be able to build the villain into a much more meaningful antagonist. But as it stands right now, you probably won't remember the villain's name once you leave the cinema. Additionally, the main villain's henchman, who's played by Pom Klementieff, also wasn't that good of a character. They rarely speak, and when they do get into a confrontation with Ethan Hunt, it doesn't take much effort on his part to best them. Although I do think that the character gets a couple moments to shine during a car chase in the film. It's the one moment where the villain feels like a legitimate threat, and it also allows for the villain to partake in some comedic moments too, as the car chase doesn't go as planned for Ethan and Grace in the film. In fact, one area of the film that I think was done surprisingly well was the humour. I think action films have kind of just worked out how to incorporate humour into their films. This was something that I mentioned in both my Free Fire and Extraction 2 videos. A lot of comedy films don't really do that well nowadays, and it used to be argued that it was the result of the MCU, because Marvel would be able to have these big budget blockbusters with massive spectacle, as well as genuinely good jokes. Now, of course, depending on who you ask, Marvel jokes have lost their oomph, and now just get in the way, but at one point in time, Marvel's humour was considered to be a major positive. So much so that every major film that released in the MCU's golden age tried to replicate that core aspect. I think action films are going through their own version of that. Films like John Wick and Extraction 2 were able to incorporate humour into the action without it coming across detrimentally to the film. Something that I think the MCU and a lot of big blockbusters fail to do now. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is also able to inject humour into its action, and whilst comedy is subjective, I think it works. However, it is different to the humour of films like John Wick or Extraction 2. In Extraction 2, it's Chris Hemsworth throwing a guy into a treadmill, and in John Wick, it's Keanu killing a guy by slapping a horse's butt. In Mission Impossible 7, the humour usually comes in the form of Ethan Hunt completing his missions in very ungraceful ways, all through Hayley Atwell's character clearly being way out of her depth and making things harder for Ethan to do. I expected Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 to have great action, but the occasional moments of good humour actually surprised me, and the action in this film is really good. It's not the best that you've ever seen, but it is good. Especially as I think there were some creative action set pieces in this film. The chase scene that I mentioned earlier being one, and the other being the final action sequence in the film that takes place on a train, which really reminded me of Uncharted 2. Whilst I wasn't too keen on the new villains, there were two characters that they added to this film that I really liked. The first was Jasper Briggs. He's a character that doesn't play too large of a role in the film, but I really liked him and I look forward to seeing what the sequel does with him. He seems to have a personal vendetta against Ethan Hunt, but is a good guy in the story too. putting aside his feelings towards Ethan so that he can help people. The other major new addition is Grace, played brilliantly by Hayley Atwell. Grace is probably my favourite character in the film. Hayley Atwell and Tom Cruise have magnificent chemistry together, and it results in the two characters really bouncing off each other. I also love that Grace feels really different to the other female characters in Mission Impossible, at least as far as I remember. She isn't some action heroine who can best 10 men at once. In fact, she'd probably struggle with one. She's a thief, and this film puts that type of character into situations that they're not used to at all, which, as I mentioned earlier, can lead to some really funny and iconic moments for the franchise. She also acts as a great foil for Ethan Hunt, as Grace is initially presented as a very selfish person. Again, she is a thief. However, whilst Ethan doesn't really change all that much over the course of the film, Grace definitely does. Her character development is nothing revolutionary, but it is something. You may be able to predict the trajectory of Grace's character development, but I think the film and Hayley Atwell are able to sell it. There is only one major issue with Grace that I can think of, and for me to say it, I will need to get into spoiler territory. Alright? Here goes. The one thing that I don't like about Grace is that at times in the film, she comes across as Hila's replacement. Sometimes it feels like Hila was killed off in the film so that they can have Grace get with Ethan in the next one. I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Hila. I know that she's really popular, but I never really clicked with the character. It's probably more due to the fact that I didn't love Rogue Nation that much, and that was the film that introduced her, but either way, this film kills her off, which was a surprise. Although the impact of her death was a little neutered by her reduced screen time, her own fake-out death at the start of the film, and because the villain literally says that either Grace or Hila were going to die, and they certainly weren't going to kill off Grace. Whilst Ethan and Hila never actually got into a relationship, it was very clear that the two had feelings for each other. I'm pretty sure there was even a kiss scene that was cut from Mission Impossible Fallout, so to see the film push a romantic relationship between Ethan and Grace, both before and after Hila's death, sort of feels like a spit in the face of Hila's character. It also just comes across like the film throwing away one English girl so that Ethan can fall for the next English girl that looks his way. I guess he has a type. Although I do like at the very least Grace and Hila are two very different characters. It's just that if you were a big fan of Hila, like I know some people are, then there's a good chance that this film could end up rubbing you the wrong way. Also, Benji and Luther return, but they're just like Ethan. If you liked them in the previous films, then you'll like them in this one, and if you didn't like them in the previous films, then this one won't change your opinion of them. Although I do kind of hope that Jeremy Renner comes back to the Mission Impossible films at some point, but I think that's really unlikely. All in all, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is a fantastic film and continues the trend of Mission Impossible being one of the best action franchises of all time. Hopefully Mission Impossible 8, which looks like it will be the last, is able to send this franchise off on a high and wrap up the loose plot threads left by this film. Anyway, that's all for today. Let me know what you thought of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 in the comments below, or even Barbie or Oppenheimer. I'm willing to listen to your thoughts. What's your favourite out of all the Mission Impossible films? Mine's Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Also, be sure to leave a like and also subscribe if you're interested. I post a video every week. Anyway, I'm done with all the normal YouTuber stuff I have to say. Bye bye.